I've just been very off-put with the negativity that has permeated my feed since Saturday night, and I'm just not sure how much longer I have in this space.
Here's an official statement from the former voice of the Octagon. And I will forever be grateful to have had the privilege of providing the soundtrack with Joe for nearly 2 decades.
Here we go!
UFC 300 is missing something. Here's your commentary team: Jon Anik, Joe Rogan, Daniel Cormier. Every time there's a highlight reel of something that went down in the UFC, we've heard a special voice. Mike Goldberg with his "Here we go, it's all over, just like that." It was the perfect narration to men and women in their underwear locked inside an octagon-shaped cage.
Here we go!
Beating the crap out of each other. Even if the fights weren't that great, Mike Goldberg was there to give us the flair that we needed. Mike Goldberg was with the UFC from 1997 to 2016. The great question is, why did the UFC let Mike Goldberg go? There are many theories to why Mike Goldberg is not with the UFC anymore. 19 years of being cage side, all the big UFC events, and then all of a sudden, no farewell. They just sent him on his way, and Jon Anik just slipped in. I'm not here to bash Jon Anik. In fact, Jon Anik is very good at what he does. The question is, what does Jon Anik do? UFC put together 3 people cage side for fights, 2 fighters for color commentary, and then a play-by-play guy. When you look at Jon Anik, is he really doing play-by-play these days? Jon Anik basically sits there, reads ads, gives some stats on a walkout, and then during the fight, Jon basically is gobbled up by his partners that are sitting next to him. People that have been inside the octagon and know what they're talking about. Sometimes you'll get nice body shot, good takedown, but other than that, it's just the other guys on the team basically babbling over him. The Michael Bispings, the Daniel Cormiers, Joe Rogan. Now, Joe Rogan is a special case here because Joe was never in the UFC, but this guy's been there from the beginning. This guy was the yin to Mike Goldberg's yang, and they worked great together. They had fantastic chemistry. Even though Joe would correct Goldie a lot, there was some charm to their commentary. But when you hear Jon Anik, it's a very robotic approach. Is it Jon's fault? Well, no. He's doing the job of what the UFC wants him to do. Basically, Jon Anik is there to give information and let everyone else shine, which is strange for me because when I got into the UFC and enjoyed watching the fights, the charm of Rogan and Goldie and the escalation of when there was a knockout or a finish, it's all over, it was very exciting. Whereas now, you have a bunch of people on the internet doing fight commentary and people are muting the actual UFC broadcast. There is zero charm anymore with the UFC commentary. The one thing I used to love about Rogan and Goldie, even if they were biased in certain situations, they still felt like 2 fans watching the fights. And Rogan was well versed in mixed martial arts. That helped giving the insight when they were sitting cage side and watching these men and women compete. Some people love Jon, and that's fair. Jon is good at what he does. He's a professional. He does his research. He makes sure he crosses his T's and dots his I's. And that's one thing I respect about Jon Anik. I feel if Jon was doing commentary for team sports, he would be phenomenal because he's very good at delivering information. But when you have guys like Mike Goldberg, he does both. He delivers the information and he gives you some sort of personality. If you notice this, Jon Anik really doesn't have many catchphrases. His big catchphrase is "one more sleep," which doesn't have anything to do with the actual fights. It has to do with before the fights. With Mike Goldberg, well, you would wait for it. If someone was getting knocked out, you're going to hear "it's all over." And I think what was going on is the UFC did not want to be overshadowed by the person that was doing the play-by-play. The UFC wanted to spotlight the fighters and make it all about them by removing the charm of the play-by-play. By removing play-by-play altogether. I mean, if you think about it, there is really no play-by-play going on during a UFC fight. It's guys breaking down the positions, Jon Anik saying "good right hand," and then that's it. And then ad reads and stats thrown out there. I miss Goldie. I miss the human element that Goldie brought to the UFC. Some say good riddance. They didn't like his style, but you can't deny the nostalgia of Goldberg. Every big highlight from back in the day, you heard his voice narrating it. Every time someone's inducted in the Hall of Fame, you hear Mike Goldberg. The UFC 300 promo, you hear it narrated by Mike Goldberg.
This monumental moment is now upon us. It is all over.
He is forever part of the UFC. So whether you like or disliked Mike, he's still a massive part of the history of the sport. In fact, he's one of the reasons why the sport is what it is. He's part of the pieces to the puzzle. Why not have him back for UFC 300? It really makes no sense. I'm not saying call all the fights. You could mix and match. Still have Anik there calling the big fights, but there are multiple championship fights. There's a BMF fight. Why not throw Goldie back in there? There's something missing to this story. Jon Anik not too long ago had a mental breakdown about MMA fans. He said he was thinking of retiring from MMA commentary because of the Strickland fan reaction to Anik saying DDP won.
Because even if you and I both thought Dricus du Plessis won the fight, we try to present that information respectfully. And when I go on to X or I go to our YouTube comments, it seems like a lot of these fans are just in attack mode. And I don't know if these fans are casual fans or not, right? But I appreciate the passion, but I'm getting to a point at 45 years of age where I don't know how much time I have left in this MMA space, because if I go do pro football, like, I'm not necessarily going to be dealing with this lowest common denominator all the time. And I don't know, man, I just feel like there's a lot of malice and disrespect from the fan base, and we can disagree. Like, don't take it from me. Demetrius Johnson and Kenny Florian thought DDP won the fight. I don't know. I've just been very off put with the negativity that has permeated my feed since Saturday night, and I'm just not sure how much longer I have in this space, honestly.
Lowest common denominator. I'm not sure how much longer I have in this space, honestly. Isn't that crazy? Now, Jon has apologized for these statements, and I'm sure he regrets saying these things because he truly loves his job, and he has a fantastic job. I mean, this guy is the voice of the Octagon now for the UFC. It's a great job, but it's got to be very stressful, traveling around, never around his family. It's got to take a toll on you mentally. But to have a breakdown like this, there's got to be some truth to it. And I do believe the truth is he doesn't like his role with the organization. At the end of the day, he's really useless. He is way more talented than what the UFC has him doing. You could say you love Jon Anik, and that's fine. I have no problems with Jon. And I'm complimenting the fact that I think he's a good commentator. But the UFC doesn't need a good commentator. The UFC just wants you to read ads and deliver the stats and let the athletes take over. Back in the day, there was a charm with Mike Goldberg. You can relate to Mike. He was just a cool guy that made mistakes. He showed passion in his commentary. He debated with Joe Rogan, but yet they truly enjoyed each other's company. So the question is, why? Why did the UFC let him go the way they did? Why did they never give him a farewell? Why are they not bringing him back for UFC 300 just as a throwback? I'm sure Jon Anik would be fine with it. I mean, it's not like he's taking his job. It's just a nostalgic moment. Or are they afraid that Mike Goldberg would come back and overshadow Jon Anik, the current commentator? It's very strange. Maybe Dana White and Mike Goldberg just didn't get along? Why is Joe Rogan not having Mike Goldberg on his podcast? There are questions that are not answered and maybe never will be answered. Was Goldberg not good enough? He did it for 19 years. To just let someone go after 19 years with no explanation is bizarre. Why has the UFC never said, well, this is why we let Goldie go? How come the UFC never gave him a proper farewell? A guy that was the voice of the Octagon for 19 years. If you have any theories, let me know down below in the comments section. I truly want to know what you think about this. We have speculated that the return of Conor McGregor, Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey will be on the card. All these nostalgic thoughts thrown out there for UFC 300. We've speculated all these crazy matchups. Who's going to show up? No one has mentioned Mike Goldberg. Isn't that weird? I reached out to Mike Goldberg. Here is an official statement from the former voice of the Octagon. Much like UFC 100 and UFC 200, both which I had the honor to call, UFC 300 is not simply a night of fights, it's a celebration. To every passionate UFC fan, all of you, as loyal and committed as any sports fan around the globe, and proud UFC fighter who has made the sacrifice, put in the hard work, and left it all in the Octagon, thank you. UFC 300 doesn't exist without each and every one of you, and I will forever be grateful to have had the privilege of providing the soundtrack with Joe for nearly 2 decades. My gratitude is massive and will never fade. UFC 300, here we go! Had to do my version of here we go. Let me know how I did with that. I can't help but think when I read that statement, this is really messed up. UFC 100, UFC 200, Mike Goldberg was the voice of the Octagon. I'm not saying take Jon Anik's job, but I'm saying this. How can you have this glorious event without Mike Goldberg? Does this make any sense? I think as fans, we deserve an explanation. Why is Mike Goldberg not coming back for UFC 300? Why did the UFC just let him go after 19 years? No tribute, no farewell, nothing.